I still remember the day my grandfather died. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, working a job I hated just to pay off student loans. I lived in a cramped apartment with two roommates who never cleaned up after themselves. My life felt small and stuck, like I was treading water in a pool with no edge to grab onto. But my grandfather, he was different. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the world was bigger than your problems, like there was always something worth smiling about even when everything seemed hard. His funeral was on a Tuesday. I took the day off work and drove 3 hours to the small town where he had lived his entire life. The church was packed with people I had never met, neighbors and friends who all had stories about him. They talked about his kindness, his humor, the way he would help anyone who needed it without asking for anything in return. I sat in the front row between my mother and my uncle, listening to all these strangers talk about a man I thought I knew, realizing maybe I only knew a small part of who he really was. After the service, we gathered at his house for the reading of the will. It was a modest home, nothing fancy, with a porch that creaked when you walked on it, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and cinnamon. My uncle was there with his wife and their 2 teenage sons. My aunt came with her husband and their daughter. My mother sat beside me, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. We were all grieving, all feeling that heavy weight that comes when someone you love is suddenly gone, and you realize you will never hear their voice again. The lawyer was an older man with gray hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He opened a folder and began reading through the will in a voice that sounded practiced and detached, like he had done this 1,000 times before. My grandfather had left his house to my uncle. He left his car to my aunt. He left his savings, which was not much, to be divided between my mother and her siblings. And then the lawyer paused, looked up at me, and said my name. He reached into a box beside his chair and pulled out a small wooden case. It was old and worn, about the size of a shoebox, with a simple latch on the front. He slid it across the table toward me and said my grandfather had left specific instructions that I was to receive this and nothing else. I looked at the box, then at my family. My uncle was staring at me with his arms crossed. My aunt had a strange look on her face, like she was trying to figure out what was inside. My mother just looked sad. I opened the latch and lifted the lid. Inside was a pile of papers, yellowed with age, folded and stacked neatly. I pulled them out and started to unfold them, trying to understand what I was looking at. They were documents, legal papers with stamps and signatures. I saw words like deed and property and ownership, but my brain was not processing it. I looked up at the lawyer, confused. He cleared his throat and explained. My grandfather, it turned out, had been buying properties for decades. Small houses mostly. Modest homes in quiet neighborhoods. He had paid for them in cash, little by little over the years. And, according to these documents, he owned 7 properties. 7. I felt my heart start to race. I looked down at the papers again, reading the addresses. My hands were shaking. Then I saw it. The first address. It was my uncle's house. The one he had been living in for the past 15 years. The one he thought he owned. I looked up at him, and his face had gone pale. I flipped to the next document. My aunt's address. The house she and her husband had raised their daughter in. I kept going. My cousin's apartment. Another cousin's townhouse. 4 of my family members were living in homes that my grandfather had owned, homes they thought belonged to them. My uncle stood up, so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He said there had to be a mistake. He said he had been paying a mortgage on that house for years. The lawyer shook his head and explained that my uncle had been paying rent, not a mortgage, to a property management company that my grandfather had set up. My uncle had never known. None of them had known. The room went silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My aunt was staring at the papers in my hands like they were a snake about to bite her. My cousin, the one whose apartment was listed, looked like he might be sick. My mother was frozen, her tissue still pressed to her face, her eyes wide. Then my uncle started laughing. It was not a happy laugh. It was bitter and sharp, the kind of laugh that cuts. He said of course my grandfather would do something like this. Of course he would play games even from the grave. He said I did not deserve this, that I had barely even visited my grandfather in the last few years, that I was too busy with my own life to care about family. He said the box was useless to me, that I would not know what to do with it, that I should just hand the deeds over to the people who actually lived in those homes. My aunt joined in. She said it was not fair. She said my grandfather had clearly lost his mind in his final years, that this will could be contested, that no judge would uphold something so cruel. She called me selfish. She said I was taking advantage of an old man's confusion. Her husband nodded along, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had personally wronged him. I sat there, holding the box, feeling the weight of their anger pressing down on me. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but my throat felt tight and my eyes were burning. I looked at my mother, hoping she would say something, but she just looked away. I realized in that moment that I was alone in this. I closed the box and stood up. I told them I needed time to think. My uncle scoffed and said I'd better think fast because he was not going to let some kid take his house away from him. I walked out of that room, out of that house, and sat in my car for 20 minutes just trying to breathe. I drove home that night in a daze. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the way they had looked at me, the things they had said. I had gone to that funeral to mourn my grandfather, to say goodbye to someone I loved, and I had left feeling like a thief. I did not understand why he had done this, why he had given me these deeds, why he had kept this secret from everyone. It felt like a burden, not a gift. For weeks after that, my phone would not stop ringing. My uncle called me every other day, sometimes angry, sometimes trying to sound reasonable. He would say things like, "We are family, we need to work this out," or "You do not really want to kick your own family out onto the street, do you?" My aunt sent me long emails explaining how hard they had worked to make that house a home, how unfair it would be to take it away from them now. My cousins texted me, some of them begging, some of them accusing me of being greedy. I stopped answering. I could not handle it. Every time I heard my phone buzz, my stomach would twist into knots. I felt guilty even though I had not done anything wrong. I had not asked for this. I had not even known those properties existed. But somehow, I was the villain in their story. I went to see a lawyer of my own. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, what my options were. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She went through the documents carefully, checking every signature, every date, every stamp. After an hour, she looked up at me and said it was all legitimate. My grandfather had owned these properties outright, and he had every legal right to leave them to me. The deeds were mine now. I could do whatever I wanted with them. I asked her what would happen if I just gave them away, if I signed the houses over to the people living in them. She said I could do that if I wanted to, but she warned me to think carefully. She said family dynamics like this rarely ended well, that even if I gave them what they wanted, they might still resent me. She said I should take my time, think about what my grandfather might have intended, and make a decision that I could live with. I left her office feeling even more confused than before. I did not want to be a landlord. I did not want to evict my own family. But I also did not want to just hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property because they were mad at me. It felt like there was no right answer. So, I started digging. I went back to my grandfather's house, which was now my uncle's responsibility to clear out, but he had not touched it yet. He was too busy being angry. I let myself in with the key my mother had given me and started going through my grandfather's things. I was looking for something, anything, that would explain why he had done this. I found it in his office. It was a small room at the back of the house, lined with bookshelves and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. There was a desk in the center with a drawer that was locked. I searched for the key and found it taped to the underside of the desk. Inside the drawer was a leather journal, worn and creased, filled with my grandfather's handwriting. I sat down on the floor and started reading. The journal went back decades. He wrote about buying his first property, a small house on the edge of town that he got for a steal because it needed work. He wrote about fixing it up himself, learning as he went, and then renting it out to a young couple who could not afford much. He wrote about how good it felt to help people, to give them a safe place to live. As I kept reading, I started to see a pattern. Every property he bought with a specific person in mind. The house my uncle lived in, my grandfather had bought it when my uncle was going through a divorce and had nowhere to go. He let my uncle move in and told him it was a rental, that he should pay what he could afford. My uncle never questioned it. He just assumed my grandfather was helping him find a place through some connection. The same with my aunt. She and her husband had been struggling financially after her husband lost his job. My grandfather bought a house and offered it to them as a rental with payments they could manage. They thought they were renting from some company. They had no idea it was him. My grandfather had been quietly taking care of his family for years, giving them stability without them ever knowing it was him. He never asked for thanks. He never held it over their heads. He just did it because he loved them. But then I found an entry from about 5 years ago. My grandfather wrote about a family gathering where he had hinted that he owned some properties, that he had made some good investments over the years. My uncle had laughed and said my grandfather was exaggerating, that he was just an old man telling tall tales. My aunt had rolled her eyes and changed the subject. Nobody believed him. Nobody took him seriously. He wrote about how much that hurt. He had spent his whole life helping them, making sure they had roofs over their heads, and they could not even give him the respect of believing him when he told them the truth. He wrote that he felt invisible, like his efforts did not matter, like he was just a wallet to them and nothing more. And then I found the entry that explained everything. It was dated 2 years before he died. He wrote that he had been thinking about his will, about what he wanted to leave behind. He said he did not want to give his properties to people who did not appreciate what he had done, who did not value him beyond what he could provide. He said he wanted to leave them to someone who might understand, someone who still saw him as a person and not just a resource. He wrote my name. He said I was the only one who still visited him just to visit, not because I needed something. He said I was the only one who asked him about his life, who listened to his stories, who treated him like he mattered. He said he knew I was struggling, that I was working hard and trying to build a life, and he wanted to give me a foundation. He wanted to give me the tools to take care of myself, and maybe one day, to take care of others the way he had. I sat on that floor and cried. I cried because I understood now. I cried because I missed him. I cried because I realized my family had taken him for granted, and now they were taking me for granted too. They did not care about what he wanted. They only cared about what they thought they deserved. I made my decision that night. I was not going to give the properties away. But I was not going to evict anyone either. I called each of my family members and told them the same thing. They could stay in their homes. They could keep paying rent, the same amount they had been paying, which was far below market rate. But they needed to understand that these were my properties now, that my grandfather had left them to me, and that I was choosing to let them stay out of respect for him, not because they bullied me into it. My uncle hung up on me. My aunt sent me a furious email calling me ungrateful and heartless. My cousin stopped speaking to me altogether. But I did not care anymore. I had spent weeks feeling guilty for something I had not done, and I was done apologizing for my grandfather's choices. My mother was the only one who supported me. She called me a few days later and said she was proud of me, that my grandfather would have been proud too. She said she was sorry for not standing up for me at the will reading, that she had been too overwhelmed to think straight. She said she understood now why he had done what he did, and she thought it was the right call. That conversation meant more to me than anything. It felt like I had one person in my corner, one person who saw me as more than just an obstacle to what they wanted. Over the next few months, things settled into a routine. My uncle paid his rent on time, though he never spoke to me. My aunt did the same. My cousins kept their distance. It was not the family dynamic I had hoped for, but it was honest. There were no more lies, no more pretending. I used the rental income to pay off my student loans. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I quit the job I hated and found something better, something that actually made me feel like I was moving forward. I saved up enough to move into my own place, a small apartment that was mine and mine alone. It was not much, but it felt like freedom. I also started learning about property management. I read books, took online courses, talked to people who had been doing it for years. I wanted to understand what my grandfather had built, to honor the work he had put into it. I realized he had not just left me houses. He had left me a legacy, a way of thinking about money and family and responsibility that I had never considered before. One of the properties, the one my cousin had been living in, came up for sale when he decided to move out of state for a job. I could have kept it as a rental, but instead, I sold it. I used the money to buy a small duplex in a neighborhood that was just starting to turn around. I fixed it up myself, learning how to patch drywall and paint trim and replace light fixtures. It was hard work, but it felt good. It felt like I was building something. I rented out both units to people who reminded me of myself a few years earlier. Young, struggling, trying to get their footing in a world that felt stacked against them. I charged them rent that was fair, not exploitative, and I made sure the place was safe and clean. When something broke, I fixed it fast. I wanted to be the kind of landlord I would have wanted when I was barely scraping by. My family never apologized. Not once. There were no heartfelt conversations, no moments of reconciliation. Holidays were awkward and tense. I stopped going to most of them. It hurt, but I accepted it. Some bridges burn, and you cannot rebuild them. Some relationships are not meant to be saved. But I did find new connections. I became friends with some of my tenants. I joined a local real estate group and met people who were doing similar things, trying to build wealth in a way that felt ethical. I started to see my grandfather's vision more clearly. He had not been trying to get rich. He had been trying to create stability for himself and for the people he cared about. He had been trying to make the world a little bit softer for the people in it. I think about him all the time. I think about the way he used to sit on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up. I think about the way he would tell stories about his childhood, about growing up during the Depression, about learning the value of $1, and the importance of taking care of people. I think about the way he never bragged, never made a big show of his generosity. He just did what he thought was right, and let that be enough. I wish I could thank him. I wish I could tell him that I understand now, that I see what he was trying to teach me. I wish I could sit on that porch with him one more time and just listen. But I carry him with me. Every time I make a decision about the properties, I ask myself what he would do. Every time I have the chance to help someone, I think about the way he helped people without expecting anything in return. Every time I feel overwhelmed or lost, I remember that he built all of this one small step at a time, and that I can do the same. The box they mocked, the one they called useless, changed my life. It gave me stability. It gave me purpose. It gave me a way to honor my grandfather's memory that feels real and meaningful. And it taught me something I did not know before. It taught me that family is not just about blood. It is about respect. It is about seeing people for who they are, not just what they can give you. My grandfather saw me. He saw me when I was struggling and unsure and trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. He saw me, and he trusted me with something that mattered to him. That is a gift I will never take for granted. I still get calls from my uncle sometimes. Usually when something breaks in his house, and he wants me to fix it. I do, because that is part of the agreement, but the conversations are short and cold. My aunt sends me a check every month with no note, no greeting, just the payment. My cousins have moved on with their lives, and I have moved on with mine. I do not hate them. I do not even blame them, not really. I think they were scared. I think they felt like the ground was shifting under their feet, and they did not know how to handle it. I think they saw me as a threat instead of as family, and that says more about them than it does about me. But I also do not need their approval anymore. I do not need them to understand or accept what my grandfather did. I know why he did it, and that is enough. There are days when I still feel the weight of it all. Days when I wonder if I made the right choices, if I should have handled things differently. But then I look at the duplex I bought, at the tenants who are building their lives there, at the savings account that keeps growing, at the future I am creating for myself, and I know I did what my grandfather would have wanted. He did not leave me houses. He left me a chance to build something meaningful, a chance to take care of myself and maybe one day to take care of others the way he took care of us, a chance to prove that I was worth the trust he placed in me. I think about the day of the will reading sometimes. I think about the way they laughed, the way they dismissed the box as worthless. I think about how wrong they were. That box held more than deeds. It held my grandfather's faith in me. It held his belief that I would do the right thing, even when it was hard. It held his love, quiet and steady, the kind of love that does not demand recognition but just keeps showing up. And now, years later, I understand what he was really giving me. He was giving me the freedom to live a life that was not weighed down by debt and struggle. He was giving me the ability to make choices based on what I wanted, not just what I could afford. He was giving me the tools to be generous the way he was generous, to help people without needing applause. I have started my own journal. I write in it every few months, keeping track of the properties, the tenants, the repairs, the decisions I make. But I also write about my life, about what I am learning, about the person I am becoming. I write it the way my grandfather wrote his journal, honest and plain, no pretense. I write it so that one day, if I have children or grandchildren, they will know where they came from. They will know that their great-grandfather was a man who believed in quiet kindness, and that I tried my best to carry that forward. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if I will buy more properties or if I will sell the ones I have. I do not know if my family will ever come around or if we will stay distant for the rest of our lives. But I do know this. I am not the same person I was the day my grandfather died. I am stronger. I am wiser. I am more certain of who I am and what I value. And I owe that to him. To the man who spent his life building something quiet and solid, who never asked for credit, who just loved his family the best way he knew how. To the man who saw potential in me when I could not see it in myself. To the man who left me a box that everyone else thought was worthless, but turned out to be the most valuable thing I have ever received. I carry his memory with me every day. I see him in the way I treat people, in the choices I make, in the future I am building. And I hope, wherever he is, he knows that I did not waste his gift. I took the foundation he gave me, and I built something on it. Something good. Something that would make him proud. That is all any of us can do, really. Take what we are given, the good and the bad, and try to make something meaningful out of it. My grandfather understood that. He lived it every single day of his life. And now so do I. The box was not useless. It was everything. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that he was right to trust me with it. The first year after I took over the properties was harder than I expected. Not because of the work itself, but because of the loneliness that came with it. I had thought that once the dust settled, once everyone accepted the new reality, things would get easier. But acceptance never really came. My family did not fight me anymore, but they did not forgive me either. And that silent resentment was somehow worse than the open anger had been. I remember the first Thanksgiving after my grandfather died. My mother called me 2 weeks before and asked if I was coming to dinner at my aunt's house. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, like she was not sure she should even be asking. I told her I would think about it. But the truth was, I already knew I was not going. I could not sit at a table with people who looked at me like I had stolen something from them. I could not pretend everything was fine when it so clearly was not. I spent that Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, eating Chinese takeout and watching old movies. My mother called me that evening, her voice thick with emotion, and told me she was sorry. She said she had tried to get the others to soften, to see things from my perspective, but they were not ready. Maybe they never would be. I told her it was okay, that I understood. But after I hung up, I sat on my couch and felt the full weight of what I had lost. Not just the easy relationship with my extended family, but the illusion that blood always meant loyalty. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into learning everything I could about property management and real estate. I read books on tenant law, on home maintenance, on financial planning. I watched YouTube videos on how to fix a leaking faucet, how to patch a hole in drywall, how to negotiate with contractors. I wanted to be good at this, not just competent. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe to my grandfather's memory, that I deserved what he had given me. The tenants in the family properties were generally good about paying rent, though my uncle was always late. Every month, like clockwork, the payment would come 3 or 4 days after it was due. Never so late that I could take action, but late enough to make a point. It was his way of maintaining some small piece of control, I think. His way of reminding me that he was not happy about the arrangement. I never said anything. I just marked the payment as received and moved on. My aunt was different. She paid early, always on the first of the month, sometimes even a day or two before. But her payments felt cold, transactional. There were never any notes, never any communication beyond the check itself. It was like she was trying to reduce our relationship to nothing more than a business arrangement, erasing any trace of the fact that we were family. And maybe that was easier for her. Maybe it hurt less to think of me as a landlord than as a niece. One of my cousins, the one who had lived in the apartment, moved out 6 months after the will reading. He sent me a brief email saying he had found a job out of state and would be vacating at the end of the month. He did not say goodbye. He did not offer any explanation beyond the logistics. When I went to inspect the apartment after he left, I found it in perfect condition. Everything was clean, repaired, respectful. It was almost like he had never been there. And, in a way, that hurt more than if he had trashed the place. It was like he was erasing any trace of our connection, making it easy for both of us to pretend we had never mattered to each other. I decided to sell that property. I was not ready to manage a rental that did not have family in it, and I needed the capital to invest in something that felt more like mine. The sale went smoothly, and I walked away with enough money to pay off the last of my student loans and put a down payment on the duplex I had been eyeing. Buying that duplex was the first decision I made that felt entirely my own. It was not something my grandfather had set up. It was not a property I inherited. It was mine, bought with money I had earned, in a neighborhood I had chosen. And that felt important. It felt like I was stepping out of his shadow, not to disrespect him, but to build something that was a continuation of his work, not just a preservation of it. I spent 3 months renovating that duplex. I hired contractors for the big stuff, the electrical and the plumbing, but I did a lot of the cosmetic work myself. I painted every room. I refinished the hardwood floors. I replaced the old light fixtures with new ones that made the space feel brighter and more welcoming. I planted flowers in the front yard and fixed the fence that had been sagging for years. It was exhausting. There were nights when I came home covered in dust and paint, my muscles aching, my hands raw. But it was also satisfying in a way I had never experienced before. I was building something. I was taking something broken and making it whole. And every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, felt like a conversation with my grandfather. I imagined him beside me, showing me how to hold the brush, how to measure twice and cut once, how to take pride in work done well. When the duplex was finally ready, I listed both units for rent. I was careful about who I chose. I did not just go with the first applicants who had good credit. I met with people. I asked them about their lives, their jobs, their plans. I wanted tenants who would treat the place with respect, who would see it as a home and not just a temporary stop. I rented one unit to a single mother named Maria, who was working 2 jobs to support her young daughter. She had been living with her sister, but the situation had become strained and she needed a place of her own. When she walked through the duplex, her eyes filled with tears. She said it was perfect, that it was more than she had hoped for. I gave her a lease at a rate she could afford, and I made sure she knew that if something broke, I would fix it fast. I did not want her to ever feel like she was a burden. The other unit went to a young couple, both of them teachers, who were saving up to buy a house of their own. They were kind and responsible, the type of people who sent me photos when they planted tomatoes in the backyard or when they repainted the bathroom with my permission. They treated the place like it mattered, and that meant everything to me. Having tenants who appreciated what I was doing changed something in me. It reminded me why my grandfather had done this in the first place. It was not about the money. It was about giving people stability, about creating spaces where they could build their lives. And for the first time since the will reading, I felt like I was doing something truly worthwhile. But even as things were going well with the duplex, the tension with my family never fully went away. It was always there, humming quietly in the background. I would see my uncle's name on my phone when rent was due and feel my stomach tighten. I would get an email from my aunt and brace myself before opening it, even though it was always just the same formal notification of payment. I would scroll through social media and see pictures of family gatherings I had not been invited to, and I would feel a pang of sadness that I tried to ignore. My mother did her best to bridge the gap. She would call me every week and fill me in on family news, trying to keep me connected even when I was not physically present. She told me about my cousin's new baby, about my uncle's retirement party, about my aunt's trip to Europe. I appreciated her efforts, but it also made me feel like a ghost, someone who was talked about but not included. There was one moment, about 2 years after my grandfather died, when I thought things might change. My mother called me and said my uncle wanted to talk. She said he had been doing some thinking, that he wanted to clear the air. I was skeptical, but I agreed to meet him for coffee. We met at a diner halfway between our two towns. It was a neutral space, busy and loud, the kind of place where serious conversations felt a little less heavy. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window, looking older than I remembered. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment, I thought he might hug me. But he just nodded and sat back down. We ordered coffee and made small talk for a few minutes. He asked about my job, about the duplex, about how I was managing everything. I answered carefully, not sure where this was going. And then he got to the point. He said he had been angry for a long time. He said he felt like my grandfather had betrayed him, had lied to him for years. He said it had been hard to accept that the house he thought he owned was never really his. But he also said he understood, at least a little bit, why my grandfather had done it. He said my grandfather had always been a private man, someone who did not like to make a fuss. And maybe he had thought he was helping, even if it did not feel like help at the time. I listened, not saying anything, just letting him talk. And then he said the words I had been waiting to hear. He said he was sorry. He said he should not have said the things he said at the will reading, that he had been hurt and lashing out, and that I did not deserve to be treated that way. I felt something loosen in my chest. I said I was sorry too, that I knew this had been hard for everyone, that I wish things could have been different. We talked for another hour, and by the end of it, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. But then, as we were getting ready to leave, he asked me a question. He asked if I had ever thought about selling him the house. He said he could get a mortgage now, that he had been saving, and that it would mean a lot to him to actually own the place he had been living in for so long. And just like that, I understood. This was not about reconciliation. This was about ownership. He had apologized, yes, but only because he wanted something from me. The anger came rushing back, but I kept my voice calm. I told him I would think about it. And then I left. I did not sell him the house. I thought about it for a few weeks, turned it over in my mind from every angle. But in the end, I decided that my grandfather had made his choice for a reason. He had not wanted these properties to go to people who saw them as transactions. He had wanted them to go to someone who would use them the way he had, as tools to help people, not as assets to be cashed in. My uncle stopped speaking to me again after that, and I accepted it. I had tried to build a bridge, and he had tried to use it to get what he wanted. That told me everything I needed to know. The years passed, and I kept building. I bought another property, a small single-family home that needed work. I fixed it up and rented it to a veteran who was struggling to find stable housing. I bought a triplex in a neighborhood that was starting to improve and rented it to 3 young families. I learned how to screen tenants, how to handle repairs, how to budget for the unexpected. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but I learned from each one. And slowly, I started to feel like I knew what I was doing. I was not just managing properties. I was creating opportunities. I was giving people a foundation, the same way my grandfather had given one to me. And that felt like a purpose worth having. I also started to build a life outside of the properties. I made friends, real friends, people who knew me for who I was and not for what I had inherited. I started dating again, something I had put on hold for a long time. I met someone who understood what I was trying to do, who saw the value in it, who supported me even when things got hard. We moved in together eventually into a small house I bought for us, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a partner, someone who was in my corner no matter what. My relationship with my mother stayed strong. She was my constant, the one person in my family who never wavered. She told me she was proud of me, that my grandfather would be proud too. And that meant more to me than any apology from the others ever could. There were still hard days. Days when a tenant could not pay rent, and I had to decide whether to be strict or compassionate. Days when something major broke and I had to scramble to cover the cost. Days when I saw my family at a distance at a funeral or a wedding and felt the sting of being on the outside. But those days were balanced by good ones. Days when a tenant sent me a thank you note. Days when I finished a renovation and stood back to admire the work. Days when I looked at my bank account and realized I was actually building wealth, not just surviving. I think my grandfather knew it would be like this. I think he knew that giving me those properties would cost me something, that it would strain my relationships, that it would force me to grow up faster than I wanted to, that it would put me in positions where I had to make hard choices. But I also think he knew I could handle it. He saw something in me that I did not see in myself, and he trusted me to rise to the occasion. And I did. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but I did. Now, 5 years after his death, I manage 8 properties. Some are families still paying rent, still keeping their distance. Some are strangers who have become part of my life in unexpected ways. And all of them, every single one, is a reminder of the man who started this, who built something out of nothing and then trusted me to carry it forward. I visit his grave sometimes. I bring flowers and I sit on the grass and I talk to him. I tell him about the properties, about the tenants, about my life. I tell him thank you over and over because I do not think I said it enough when he was alive. And I tell him that I understand now. I understand why he did what he did. I understand what he was trying to teach me. And I promise him that I will keep going, that I will keep building, that I will honor his memory by doing this work the right way. The box they mocked was not useless. It was a key. A key to a life I never could have imagined, a life with purpose and stability and the ability to help others. And every day, I am grateful for it. Every day, I try to live up to the faith my grandfather had in me. Every day, I remember that the greatest gifts are not the ones that come easy. They are the ones that challenge us, that push us to become better, that ask us to rise above our own limitations and become the people we were meant to be. My grandfather gave me that gift, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring it.